Hey guys, it's Chase from YourOfficePro.com. Today we're going to be talking about rental rates, specifically the different types of ways you might see rental rates quoted, how you can calculate the rent, and how much you will actually be paying in rent monthly and annually in any given space that you might be looking at. We're going to look at that for office, industrial, and retail properties. So stay tuned. All right, so first up are office rental rates. Typically, when you're seeing a building, an office building, quoting an office rental rate, it will be full service gross. Full service or gross. You may see it abbreviated FS. You may see it abbreviated SFG. You may see it just listed as gross. When you see this, what you're seeing is an all-in number. And so that might be $24 per square foot, for instance. And so if you're seeing $24 per square foot, then what you know is that is an annual number per square foot. And if it says FS after it, or gross, FSG, then you know that's an all-in number. Well, all-in what? What comprises this number? Well, all of these commercial office buildings, there's a component of that number that is base rent, and there's a component of that number which covers the operating expenses for that property. So you can think of it as base and the operating expenses, or OPEX. That's always going to be the case. So in this case, and this will be different in every market as far as to how much the operating expenses are, but in this case, let's say you had $14 a square foot in base rent, then that would mean that the building has $10 a square foot in operating expenses. You could ask the leasing agents of the property what the operating expenses are for the property, what they've been running, what they're estimated to be in the coming year. If it's a full service gross number, you don't have to add anything to it. That number is the number you'll use to figure out what the rent is. So that's full service gross. So let's talk some numbers. Let's say you've got a 3,000 square foot office and you're being quoted $24 full service gross. So $24 a square foot times 3,000 square feet is going to give you $72,000 a year. That's $72,000 a year in rent. You divide that by 12 and you've got $6,000. So $6,000 in rent if it's a 3,000 square foot space and they're quoting you $24 a foot gross rental rate. If this were a triple net, which is another type of rental rate that you might see, these are the two most common for office. You've got full service gross and then you've got triple net, which would be abbreviated NNN. Typically when you see it quoted. So instead of seeing a 24FS, what you're going to see is, let's say, $16 a square foot triple net. And what you need to understand when you're seeing a triple net rental rate is that is only your base rent. Similar to how this 24 was comprised of a 14 and 10, when you're seeing this 16 NNN, you need to understand that these are not apples to apples. They're not the same. This is not cheaper. What you're going to have here is 16, and then maybe this building's got another $10 operating expenses. Let's say their operating expenses are the same. It's 10, so now you're at 26 all in for this building, and this building over here is 24. So what you're obviously realizing is if you see a triple net rental rate, you have to know what the operating expenses are for that property to accurately calculate the rent. So one common mistake tenants make is they'll see the 16, they'll compare it to the 24, and they'll assume the 16 is cheaper. And a lot of times, more often than not, it's more expensive. And the other thing they'll do is they won't know that, look, you've got to calculate the operating expenses by getting an estimate from the building. You can't just, each market will have a general number that's typical, a good average number. A lot of brokers would be able to tell you what that is for your local market, but really the best way to do that is to contact the building leasing team or property management, whoever, and try to get an accurate number for the operating expenses for that year so that you can come up with this number here. And so obviously, just to finish out the example, if it's the same 3,000 square foot space at $26 a foot, it is $78,000 per year, and that is $6,500 per month in rent. So that right there are the two most common rental rate structures that you will see in the office commercial leasing world. You have a full service gross and you have a triple net. Okay, next we're going to go into industrial commercial property. Now, we're talking rental rates. It is very, very similar to what we just covered with office properties. Typically, you're going to see it quoted as either a triple net or a gross rental rate. A couple of differences we'll go through here. First of all, if you see a gross rental rate for an industrial property, it's not usually quoted as a full service gross or that FS we talked about. It's more commonly quoted as an MG or an IG, modified gross or industrial gross. But the important thing for you to realize is that's typically the same thing as a full service gross on office in terms of it being an all-in number. Now, we will go through a couple of changes with the operating expenses in a few moments later in this video, but in terms of calculating the rent, there's nothing else that you're going to need to add for the rent portion, if it's MG, IG, or FS. On the triple net side of the equation, it works exactly the same in the sense that you have a base and you have an operating expense component. You have to know both of them. The difference typically with industrial is you very often see those numbers quoted on a monthly basis and not an annual basis. So whereas with office we had a $24 or $26 gross number once you added everything in, with industrial it's very common for you to see it on a monthly basis. So 60 cents triple net as a monthly number, 60 cents, very clearly not an annual number. So if you had a 10,000 square foot warehouse or industrial facility, manufacturing facility, flex office warehouse, what have you, you're going to take that 10,000 square foot number, multiply it by 60, and that's going to give you 0.60, and that's going to give you a monthly number, which is $6,000. But remember, that's a triple net rate. That means that's the base. We need to know the operating expenses. So let's say the OpEx here is 20 cents. It's a monthly number, 0.2 times your square footage, and that will give you the amount of operating expenses going into this monthly rent. It's $2,000. You add those together, and you have an $8,000 monthly rent for that space that you see quoted as 60 cents triple net. You will occasionally see these numbers annualized, so 60 cents would be $7.20. So you will see that occasionally. It's just more common to see it on a monthly basis. The same can happen on a modified gross, an industrial gross. You might see it $7.20. You might see it as an all-in 80 cents for the entire monthly number. Just know that obviously if you're seeing this number that's below $1 or just above $1, that's almost always going to be a monthly number and not that annual number. And if you're seeing the larger number, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10, $12 a foot or higher, then you know that that's an annual number. All right, now retail, really not going to spend too much time on retail because to be honest, it's almost always going to be quoted as a triple net number. Obviously, we've gone through this twice now in this video. You understand now that there's a base rental and an operating expense component to a triple net rental rate. Almost always, when you're looking at retail property, it's going to be a triple net rate. Occasionally, you could see a gross number quoted, and it would most likely be an MG or an FS abbreviation. If you have any doubts about the number you're seeing, of course you can ask the leasing agent, but knowing everything that we've covered up to this point, I think will help you in your searches to just understand before you have to go and waste that time and go ask somebody to get your hopes up and understand that at the end of the day it's going to be too expensive and it wasn't what you were expecting it to be. So the last piece of this video is going to be about operating expenses. We've talked about the operating expenses a lot here, whether they're in the rate already, whether we're adding them after the fact. And I mentioned earlier that there is a slight difference sometimes in what you'd expect those numbers to be. And let's go through that right now. Okay, now we'll start with office properties. Generally speaking, and by generally I mean almost all the time, almost every time, when you see an operating expense number for a multi-tenant office building, that will include the taxes, so the property taxes that the landlord pays for that property they own, the insurance, and that is the insurance that the landlord pays for the property, not any type of insurance that the tenants are paying for on their own. Management, so any expenses that are incurred in order to manage the property. Maintenance, so pretty simple, right? It's a large property. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into it, both structurally, the roof, the HVAC systems, landscaping, mowing the grass, and then within the actual leased spaces as well, right? There may be repairs that need to be made, changing light bulbs out, that sort of thing. Lots of different things that maintenance could include, but it's pretty much catch-all for all of that has to go on within the property. Taxes, insurance, management, maintenance, electrical. And really this could be utilities, because if you have water, that would be included as well. Very often you have water available to you in your office property, both in common points, in restrooms, and then also occasionally or very often in your leased space in a sink. And if you do have that, then utilities, water, and the electrical costs, the utility costs, those are included in that operating expense number as well. And then the final component here is janitorial. So typically in these multi-tenant office buildings, there is a cleaning crew that's coming in, building standard hours Monday through Friday at the end of the day, and they are cleaning all of the spaces. That's janitorial costs, along with taking away any dumpsters on the property. So all of that gets lumped up into an operating expense number in a multi-tenant office building. Now I keep saying multi-tenant. If you're a single tenant office building, so you have a 5,000 square foot office that's standalone, you're the only one occupying it, a lot of times the landlord is not going to do the janitorial. They may or may not handle the electrical. They may have the tenant just handle that and contract it out on their own. Very often the maintenance is split, and the landlord is only covering some of the exterior maintenance, structural, that sort of thing. And a lot of times then in that scenario, in a single tenant office building, the tenant will be paying for the interior maintenance. There really isn't much management to speak of in a single tenant building. And then taxes and insurance are usually part of what the landlord's paying for as part of that operating expenses. So that's office, single, and multi-tenant. Now, when you move to industrial and retail, another term that you might hear is CAM, Common Area Maintenance. Sometimes you hear it on the office side as well, but really what we're talking about with CAM, or Common Area Maintenance, you're really talking about taxes, insurance, and a portion of the maintenance. And so in an industrial property and in a retail property, generally those tenants have more responsibility than in a multi-tenant office scenario. And it's more similar to a single tenant office scenario. So, the taxes and the insurance are being paid for and then spread out to each of the tenants through the CAM that's assessed, through that operating expenses. And then each of the tenants are handling their own janitorial. They'll probably have to have their own waste removal through a dumpster. They're paying for their own electricity, utilities. They're coordinating all of that on their own. And then again, there's not much management to speak of. And then maintenance is almost always the interior of the space is the tenant's responsibility. There are caveats to that. There are things you can negotiate to change that slightly. Every scenario is different, but generally speaking, in an industrial, a single tenant scenario almost always, and in a retail, whether it's multi-tenant or single tenant, the tenant's paying a lot of that maintenance of the interior of the space. The landlord's really responsible for the exterior of the building, the the actual siding of the building, the structural, the roof, that sort of thing. So you need to keep that in mind, because if you are looking at a multi-tenant office building, you really can see that most of your expenses outside of a phone and internet are already covered. Whereas if you're looking at that same 3,000 square foot space in a different environment, you would want to understand that there's some additional cost that you'll be incurring that you might not see reflected in that rental rate number. So keep that in mind. I hope this was helpful to you guys. Give me any comments if you have any questions, or shoot me an email at chase@yourofficepro.com. Would love to help, and I'll see you next time.